guess my journey with Notion started back in 2013. That's when I invested in the company. And I think when I invested, I guess the thesis that I invested in was this idea that that everybody can kind of essentially everybody should have the power to build software on their own. Like everybody should be able to build their own tools. And I guess the pitch that Ivan gave was essentially like, we all use an expensive computer, but there's only a small section of the world that can really build tools and really build software. Everybody else just uses them. And the idea was like, could you kind of almost provide everybody with the building blocks so that they can kind of build their own tools? And, Manav, painfully, I think the company kind of stayed in that zone for almost 4 years. It basically wasn't able to even launch a product for 4 years. And part of the learnings were that nobody, most of the people in the world are not getting up to, build software. A lot of people are just getting up to do their work and to solve their problems. And so Notion was living in kind of a dreamy world where everybody in the world can build software. Turns out people didn't really have much of a use case like that. So I think the company pivoted, I think in early 2017 to still have that long-term dream. But I think in the short term, we kind of had to very much use the jobs to be done framework and think about what is it that knowledge workers need on a daily basis. And I think Notion 1.0 was very much focused on being able to take notes and being able to run a wiki inside the company. And then in, I think, middle of 2018, Notion introduced database. That was kind of Notion 2.0, which kind of extended Notion's usage into kind of task and project management. And I guess once we put both of those together, I think things have really accelerated in the last couple of years. And I think part of the reason for this acceleration is I think, people are kind of tired of kind of some of these old tools that exist for wiki and for project management. But more importantly, I think people are getting a little tired of using so many different tools at work. I think if you talk to any startup, they're already up to 30, 40 different tools to do like the basic work. And I think the pendulum is going to swing the other way, where I think there's going to be a little bit more consolidation and people want to be able to do that work in fewer pieces of software. And I think that's probably what has helped Notion truly grow in the last couple of years, is that there's this market demand to be able to take notes, have a wiki, do your project management, all of that in one place, as opposed to 5 different tools.
So of course, so if I understand you, so you think the key insight was, instead of using Google Docs and Evernote and Wiki and Word doc, this is one place where you can consolidate. It's a pretty audacious task because you have very, very big players who have captured a large share of market there. So how was the users targeted? Were the same users? Like I'm a user of Notion and also a user of Google and entire Google ecosystem, right? And Microsoft ecosystem. So what is the kind of thought process behind it? Are the new users, are the same users you're going to switch over a period of time, or you're going to spend same amount of time with you and some more time with Google? So what is the thought there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a multi-decade dream of maybe replacing Microsoft Office or kind of the Google suite. But I think that's kind of like a 10 to 20 year, it takes a long time but if you think about Office as kind of like the thing that kind of dominated in the 90s, and I think in many ways Google Apps has replaced that. Our hope is that folks graduating from college are not picking either Office or Google Docs. They're actually picking Notion because it's a lot more powerful, a lot more integrated. So our hope is that this is the 3rd generation of Office tools. Having said that, I guess we started with a lot more focus, right? So I think when we think about the next year, maybe even the next 3 years, I don't imagine us getting anywhere close to the reach of these 2 products. And I think what we do really well right now is think about Manav as like the single player user which is Manav needs a tool to write notes. Manav needs a way to publish, a public blog post. Manav needs a way to collaborate with his wife to be able to do home things. That's what really gets you to use Notion. And once you kind of get used to the power of Notion, you start to kind of expand that usage to like maybe other use cases, and you realize, well, actually, this is a really powerful product. I should be using it at Aka Software. I should be bringing this to the team and really collaborating there, because that's where I can really get the power of the software, right? And so I don't know if that was kind of like how it played out. I mean, I can tell you that story today in 2020, but I think in 2018, when we launched the Notes and the Wiki product, it was a personal use case. And so a lot of the early users were just people who wanted a more powerful Evernote. And that's why they came to Notion. And that's what they paid for. And that's kind of how the initial business was built. And then slowly we've built a lot of the team use cases, enough to a point where now most of the business is the multiplayer side. And we can make the single player side free, which we did earlier this year.
Right. I think a lot of our audience are actually early startups because they're all starting. Some are starting now, some are in the pre-revenue, some in early revenue stages. So how do you, and obviously, I know that Notion has taken 4-5 years in getting to PMF stage. So what are the few insights and learning from getting to PMF, right? Is it okay to take 4-5 years to get PMF? You're also an investor in SaaS, I know that. And you have much wider experience from Pulse to LinkedIn. So what is your real insight in getting from a seed to a PMF stage? Is it okay to take more time? What are the top 3 things that you would do to reach to PMF stage faster? Would love to get your learnings there.
Well, I think that, the sooner you get to PMF, better. I think the 4 or 5 years that Ivan and Simon spent were pretty painful. Almost ran out of money. I think Ivan took a loan from his mom to like continue the business. And so I hope nobody has to go through that. But I think Ivan's vision is so kind of big that I think he used the time to like rebuild Notion in a way that kind of made sense in the long term. And actually, in many ways, rebuilding it 3-4 times made, in many ways, helped us build a tech stack that was very modular. Even if you think about like Notion today, people are building very complex systems in Notion, but at the end of the day, like what Notion engineers are building are very simple, almost Lego block style modular things that we're giving to our people, and then they're building a lot of these different things. And so I guess learnings from the product market fit, try to kind of reduce the scope, reduce like trying to build, let's say from day one, if you're trying to build like a Microsoft Office replacement for like the entire knowledge worker base, that's kind of like, trying to do everything for everyone means that you're going to be nothing for no one. And so you gotta like kind of reduce it. And I think for Notion, we kind of reduced it to like, okay, Notes and Wiki is where we're going to start. We're going to reduce it to, 10 people startups, 10 people or less in San Francisco is really what the focus was. And then Ivan literally, I remember was just kind of through investors, through friends, just focused on making sure like a 5-person, 10-person startup is able to truly love using Notion, right? I think that was his goal, was not trying to kind of really go into large enterprises, but make sure like at least a 10% startup in San Francisco is able to run their, most of their kind of day-to-day stuff on Notion. Once that got pretty good and the feedback was like, I can't live without this tool, dreams started to kind of expand. We kind of moved from Notes to like project management to task management to like an API that we launched this week. Move from like 10 people teams to now like there's 5,000 people teams using Notion. But the early days of SaaS software, you gotta pick a very kind of small audience, it needs to be kind of much more kind of reduced so that you're not trying to go after a really wide range of kind of types of customers and then realize that you're just getting pulled from all different directions.
So Akshay, I was saying that leading from there on saying that, as you just said, let's focus on one particular problem, limited feature set, that is very dependent on how do you really define your initial customer set, right? Initial customer profile. So how do you really come to that? Is it so now in hindsight, all of us are learning that the initial customer profile is only startups, 5 to 10 users, get a single player on, and then expand after that after a few years. But what is the process that was followed to get to that ideal customer profile? Was it a lot of series of mistakes? So what was the learning there?
I mean, I think for Notion, so this kind of precedes my time, but I was close to Ivan, so I think a lot of it was just trying to, I guess the easiest is to solve for yourself. So I think you could solve for in Notion's case, I think Ivan could solve for 4 people that were working in the office and seeing like, hey, could we pretty much run our business on Notion? Like, could Notion be like the one software that allows us to take notes, have a knowledge base, manage projects, have a list of all the tasks? And if that's the easiest is to start with you. And then you realize, okay, well, this is kind of like the closest next thing was kind of the San Francisco startups, which there's actually a ton of them that are in that space that you could go after. And this is related to kind of Notion, right? Notion is a general purpose productivity tool. I mean, if you're trying to build a tool that's very specific to, let's say, salespeople, then you can figure out, is it salespeople in San Francisco? Is it salespeople in Bangalore? Like how large is the company? What kind of use cases you're trying to solve for? What kind of jobs you're actually trying to do for the customer? And then the more precise you get, the more you can try to be a tool that is something that is very useful for that segment. But I think, a lot of it also gets refined by just talking to as many customers as you can, right? I think in the early days, it wasn't that you use Notion and suddenly like it just works for you. I think a lot of people just dropped off in the early days, and you kind of refine, well, it works for these kind of people, it doesn't work for these kind of people. What is the characteristics of this group where the product is sticking? I think the Superhuman founder had a really simple idea to think about product market fit, which was, if you do a survey, you gotta get to a point where you ask them like, hey, if I take this product, would you be heavily disappointed or would you be fine without it? And if you can get to a point where there's like 40-50% of the people saying I'm going to be heavily disappointed, that's where you feel like you have this product market fit. And in the early days, the Notion product didn't stick. I think it feels like right now it's like, okay, a lot of startups start with Notion. Early days of Notion was very kind of generic, general purpose. I think the early days was also like the use cases we were trying to solve for was not as specific as like the wiki use case that we eventually got to. And so I think kind of painfully iterated through to get to wiki, but it wasn't as clear cut. I think a lot of times people think like, oh, Notion's is like amazing overnight success, but I can tell you there were many, many years of kind of like input into it. And you just kind of struggle to find something that sticks with users.
Yeah, I guess the key word here for Notion, I think, is the iteration and just learning through the observations and then get to the right point in time. So I think there's an interesting question from the audience, especially crowded market, right? Your Google and Microsoft and big players. So what was the early thoughts on positioning it? How do you bring clarity on the positioning?
I think for us, we decided that kind of small startups was kind of where we wanted to get to. And I think in the early days, even when I joined, we were trying to get to a point where almost a good percentage of San Francisco startups kind of start with Notion. And so, we didn't care as much about like large companies using Notion as much as we cared about like, if you're a new startup, if you're in Y Combinator, are you using Notion? And we used to track this. You track it even today, where even without us necessarily marketing, I think more than half of the YC batch uses Notion, on their own. And I think the early days were and so we kind of worked that market really well. This kind of ties into one of the questions that I think Rishabh asked also, is like, how did we do this? So I think initial outreach was through investors, through our networks, through Ivan, just kind of meeting other people. Ivan was kind of, in the early days was kind of fun because I think Ivan and Simon were not only working and building the product, but they were also kind of the support people. So as startups were writing to us, they could essentially just build that functionality and then kind of close the loop really fast. And Ivan would basically just go visit these companies and just sit there and see how they're using the product to really refine it. And then all of this culminated into launching on Product Hunt, which we felt was like the right place to launch the product because of the focus on startups. And I don't think anybody, I thought Product Hunt would give us maybe a few hundred startups, but I think it really blew up when we launched the 1.0 version on Product Hunt. And I think huge amount of thanks to Naval, who hunted it on Product Hunt. And so it kind of really went way beyond San Francisco. And suddenly there were just hundreds or maybe even thousands of users every day kind of coming to Notion, starting to use the product. So I think that's where it really hit a nerve. And then since then, we've just kind of been building on top of that.
I think it's a great story of perseverance. The more I hear you, I think to be able to, go hustle, persevere, iterate, and then don't get frustrated with the not to get it is really amazing. So once you got the PMF stage, was the point of time when you actually joined. How did you start putting in a little bit of early growth parameters, early GTM on it? So just walk us through that process, because once you reach the PMF stage, how do you start thinking about the GTM model?
Well, I think we're still figuring out on the go-to-market side, especially as it relates to enterprise and sales. I think we're still figuring it out. We're probably, it's probably the third quarter of iteration. So I guess on the sales side, we are kind of where the product was in 2016. And so I think I joined middle of 2018, and a lot of my work in the first year or so was to really make sure I actually spent most of the first year on support because it turns out that the reason I think this was we were only 9 people. I think I was the 9th employee. There were 3 engineers, 1 designer, and then there was 4 support people. And essentially our sales and marketing engine was just our support people, right? So our support people were basically the front door to our customers. They were helping them buy the product. They were helping troubleshoot. They were helping set it up for them. And I spent the first year just making sure that engine is humming along, because that's kind of the best sales and marketing you can do, right? Essentially, if your product is good enough and if you can provide excellent customer service, it feeds itself really well. And so I didn't force kind of a GTM model in the first year, because I felt like there was a lot of self-serve business that could be built just by making sure the customer service is really strong. One of the things we did with customer service is we kind of, it was really important for us to think about support less as a cost center. When you hear a lot of the product, when you hear a lot of the support teams, you kind of hear this question around, hey, deflect questions, reduce questions. And to me, I think we went the opposite. We want more people to ask us questions. We want more people to engage with us. It's not our back office support center. It's our front office. This is where we sell the product. This is where we help onboard you. And so I invested heavily on the support side, because to me, that felt like the most efficient sales and marketing we could be doing. And along with that, my counterpart, Camille, started to really build the community side. We started to do events. We started to really build the ambassador program that we have right now. And that was really kind of what drove a lot of growth, right? If you think about Notion, how much it's grown in the last 2 years, a lot of it is because there's so much community love. I mean, there's so many people, even in India, who are just so much passion in that community. And so that was kind of the phase A of go-to-market for me, which was okay, are we collecting all this things we're learning, and are we building it back into the product? Because I think that worked really well for us. Now what's happened is, a couple years in, a team of 10, 20 people has now scaled up to 2,000 people in some cases. Now, to manage a 2,000 person company all using Notion is a different task, because they're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars with Notion, and they expect a different kind of service, and different, there's a bunch of needs around single sign-on and security, and they need a contract, and they want to do some sort of, they need some sort of an SLA, and all of this, I think, is kind of, for us, we're slowly building that muscle as we go up market, and I guess the other reason is, at the end of the day, like a lot of the enterprise sales is a lot about distribution, which is thinking about like how do you distribute your product, and I think the one mistake that most entrepreneurs make is they think like, well, my product is good enough, so it will just find its way to different companies, and I think even for product-led growth companies, I think everybody realizes at some point that large companies, let's say more than 1,000 employees, they're not going to suddenly adopt your product. And even if they do, I think the IT team will come in and just block it at some point. And so you kind of have to build that muscle. And a lot of the GTM muscle has been a work in progress, and we're still working on it. And you'll see us launch fairly boring enterprise features right now, but that's because large companies need that.
Right. No, it's really. I didn't know that support was such a big way to get started, and very different way of building support and community. So you also have a great experience at LinkedIn, right? And LinkedIn also went through a lot of product-led growth model. So if somebody was starting today in India, and a lot of people are in this audience also are thinking about we are on the verge of a SaaS, a wave around the globe. So what would be your framework? What are the three things, framework you would advise or suggest the entrepreneurs to look at from a product-led growth model perspective? Having summed up your learning from Pulse to LinkedIn and now at Notion, which is all very, very different actually.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is different. It's also kind of similar in some ways. I mean, LinkedIn, the area that I worked on was more on the consumer product side, but LinkedIn's also similar that it's like kind of collected a lot of the consumer, I guess, used a lot of the consumer side to collect a lot of the profile identity engagement. And then actually on back of that, actually built a lot of like really compelling B2B products. And most of the business at LinkedIn was kind of B2B SaaS in many ways. I think that, I mean, I would say product in terms of kind of how you're iterating the product, I guess on the B2B side, it's more complex and it's easier in different ways compared to consumer. I think the consumer side, the early days are probably like not as bad as enterprise, because I think like the I guess feedback loops are a lot faster on the consumer side. But in the consumer side, you're kind of like just kind of shooting in the dark. Like nobody knows what really ticks. Like, I mean, who thought Snapchat would be, an $80 billion company when it first came out? It was built around here, Stanford people. I didn't think that was really a use case. Like, who wants something that disappears? But now it's like, it's a real use case, and it's an amazing product, and it's gone on to become such a large business. I think when you think about SaaS, it's kind of different, which is like the early days are actually harder because you're just like figuring out something that sticks in like this like workplace, and like it's the feedback loops are like harder, and it's not something necessarily you're building for yourself. But once you get to product market fit, things become a lot more easier. Like when I came to Notion with a lot of the product market fit there, as a consumer guy, I found the B2B stuff like a lot more straightforward. Like I kind of like, businesses ask something, I make that, businesses pay me more. Like it's a lot more kind of straightforward from that standpoint. So it's kind of an interesting kind of, I guess when you compare them, they're kind of interesting. Now, Notion is obviously unique that in that it also has a consumer side as well as a B2B side. And so I think that has kind of interesting parallels, but I don't know. I mean, I would say it's hard to kind of pinpoint one or two things, but I would, if I had to give one feedback, I guess, to all entrepreneurs, it would be to think about distribution as much as you think about product. And the distribution, like I think most companies think that one channel, maybe which is just product led, is enough. And I think as you scale the business, you realize that you kind of need to build multiple channels. So, for us, like, we have a product self-serve business. Now we're building a go-to-market kind of on the enterprise sales side. At some point next year, we'll have to build the channel side. And you kind of have to like attack all these distribution kind of sources to really be able to get to scale. There is no other way except to kind of really think about those things. And so, if there's kind of founders watching this, distribution, like, you got to work on it. It just don't expect your product to be good enough that that'll distribute itself. Even when your product is really good, and I think the Notion product is fantastic, we think about distribution as much as we think about product.
Great. So when you come to a growth stage or early part of the growth stages, how do you really prioritize the product features? Because it's a Notion out there. Like, Notion can be used in many ways, right? There are so many use cases that can come on Notion. And also now, as you're saying, so you have a complexity of multiple use cases, complexity of multiple profiles, and also, we also segment across small to the large organizations. So how do you make those calls? What are the few learnings in making those calls, which then lead to a straightforward growth rather than going in a zigzag fashion?
This is actually really fun. This is probably the one thing that we do really, really well at Notion. So I'm happy to kind of maybe take some time to explain this, because I think this is something that maybe other entrepreneurs may benefit from. So I think one of the things we've done in Notion is that we've kind of created a canonical set of tags. So essentially, like, initially it was about 200 or so. Now it's, a little bit more than I would like. But let's say there's 200 tags that is basically the universe of things that we're listening from customers. So we use Intercom to kind of, get the in-app chat, but then also emails, Facebook messages, Twitter DMs, all flow into Intercom. Now, each message on Intercom is tagged with one of these 200 tags. And it's a rule. The support team that works on it needs to tag with one of the 200. And then what we do is we actually use the Intercom API to take the frequency of these tags, and then we pull that data into Notion. And so these 200 tags then are rolled up into about 30 or 40 different projects we have that we need to work on. And there's a robot every morning that actually pulls the frequency of data, pulls it into Notion. And so the engineers at Notion have a real-time view of like what is being requested across these different tags, which then roll up to different projects. Now, every quarter, we start with intuition. We obviously start with like, okay, what feels right for us to build next? But then very quickly, we actually back it up with data, because we have this real-time data. So we back it up with like, okay, what is being requested? And very often our intuition and our data actually kind of, align pretty well. And so I guess, how did we decide these 200 tags? I don't know. It's probably a lot less for most companies. My guess is the less, the better. The reason it's 200 for Notion is because Notion is like 10, 20 different software in one. And for each software, there's probably like 10, 20 different features. So for note-taking, there's probably like 10, 20 things that people are requesting. For a wiki, there's 10, 20 things that people are requesting. For a Jira use case, there's another set of use cases. I think the best way to think about tags is like workflows, right? If you had to give your support people workflows, so if a request comes in for the API, use this workflow for your support. Your tag should basically mirror that. And the more you kind of qualify that, the better your data you have. Now, we don't even only use it for support. We have to use the same tags for sales conversations. So every salesperson who has a meeting with a customer, if a customer says, "Oh, I wish your search was better," the salesperson is also using the same set of tags to kind of tag that meeting note. And so for an engineer, like, they have a quick way. If someone's working on search, they can read all the conversations in Intercom happening around search. They can also read enterprise meeting notes that are happening with the salespeople when someone complains about search. And we kind of almost had to like build this out, because otherwise we would go absolutely crazy trying to figure out what to build next.
It's a great framework, giving a real-time insight into how to prioritize the features. So who does this job in an organization? I'm just going to a little bit about org structure also, because a lot of time founder is so busy in getting the customer, getting the product right. So who typically thinks about putting this system in place, and how do you decide what are the core of the company is going to be around? Because you can't put all the systems in one time.
Well, I mean, Notion's pretty unique in that, I mean, we don't have like a product manager or like a ops person. So I guess at Notion, we have thought about like, how do we build better systems rather than like really think about necessarily like a humans doing it. And so in this case, once the system was set up by Ivan and I originally, it kind of works without necessarily needing any input. As long as a support person is tagging all the information, it's ending up in all the projects database that the engineer has. Now, an engineer can then, when they're working on something, they can then go and read raw feedback that actually helps them kind of design better. But you could actually have, I mean, you could easily have like a product ops person who's synthesizing this information for engineers to look at.
Right.
I mean, Ocean's pretty small, so we've kind of taken the approach of building systems. But I think, you could add a product manager or ops person to do that also.
It's a great learning. So does the feedback from community also loops back into this? You talk about support side, right? And you had the community also as a big thing, which is helping Notion grow at a very fast pace. So does that feedback also comes in real time from the community? Do you pick the tags from there as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of the customer stuff goes into Intercom as like the main place.
The funnel.
And then except for enterprise sales conversations, those are meeting notes that we put in Notion, and then they connect to Salesforce. All the customer information, including the ambassadors and including the enterprise customers, all of that flows into that. And then you kind of have a real-time view on those on any given day.
I understand. I got it. There's also a question on. I was moving a little bit on the pricing part of GTM, and as you know, freemium is a very big part of product-led growth. So how has that worked for Notion? Are there any learnings around that? Should we have a freemium or not, or how long, and how do you really then get customer from a single player to multiplayer and the paid version start, right? You scale from small teams to large enterprise. And so how is that entire business model journey has been?
Yeah, I think it's evolved. I mean, early days, a lot of the revenue was just people use the product. I think we have this concept of 1,000 blocks. So you get 1,000 blocks, and then after you run out of those blocks, you kind of pay for it. There's a lot of confusion because people were like, what is the block? And, how do you count? And but I think it served us well in the early days. Basically, it got to it was kind of like a usage-based model like Dropbox had. You'd run out of space and you upgrade. I think very soon when we introduce the multiplayer team mode, I think team is where most of the revenues move towards. And we had enough conviction on that side that we made the personal plan almost free earlier this year. And we also introduced the enterprise plan, which is kind of like there's a certain set of features large companies want, and we're going to put that into a kind of slightly more expensive plan. I think the packaging pricing could continue to improve. We actually haven't experimented as much as we would like, but I would say it's kind of the conversions is something that we have kept track of on every week to week basis, and we've kind of taken a look at it's a single funnel if you think about it. It's kind of like individuals sign up, some of them convert to personal, some of them convert to team, then the team expands. Team continues expanding to a point, and then it trickles over to enterprise at some point because it's large enough where the company needs to do it. And it's a single funnel that you can kind of optimize for, right? It's like we don't have a preference for self-serve revenue versus sales revenue. We kind of want people to just kind of get the value they want from the product and then pay for whatever feels right for them. And so that's kind of been an approach right now, and it evolves, right? So when we made the personal plan free, I think a lot of people were surprised because most people think of Notion as like an Evernote replacement. They don't think of it as like a wiki or a project management tool. And so a lot of people were like, well, does this mean this is going to have ads? Because they didn't realize that most of the business is actually teams, not individuals.
Right, got it. Yeah, a single funnel is probably the best way to organize. Then you have a singular view, and you can figure out drop-offs and feedback, and also your sales motion through that. That's a great insight. So I have one last question for you. No, obviously you are sitting in the valley. You're seeing the SaaS wave coming there as well. Many more companies gone IPO. The massive acquisition happened. So what are for SaaS founders? What are your top three takeaways when you want to build a product-driven or product growth engine or product-led organization?
Well, I think, let's see, I guess the first thing I would say is like start with user problems. I think it's very easy to, this might seem very simplistic, but I still think a lot of entrepreneurs that I've met are just trying to build something cool. Like they think a technology is cool and they want to build something cool, but it turns out that cool things don't necessarily sell. I think what sells is, a solution to an existing problem that people have. So you got to start with problems people have, stay close to it, and try to solve them. I think the other thing I would say is, I think in the early days, like quality and speed matters more than quantity. And so I think like try to build maybe fewer things, but build them well and fast, as opposed to like just building a lot of different things. And then the last thing I kind of already mentioned, but I would say like don't underestimate distribution. You gotta like think very deeply about distribution and how I think a good product itself is not enough. You gotta connect it to strong distribution channels.
Got it. No, perfect. If I have to summarize this conversation, I have learned a lot today. I think the perseverance part, the iterations, and your great insight into how support is such a key piece of getting early insight into the customer behavior, problems, and it's a very boring area. I have not seen many companies really cracking that. Support is a separate function. Product doesn't spend too much time on it. Having this integrated system in real time support, I think, is a great framework for us to all adopt. And I fully agree with you. The basic things is what we all got to get wrong. What is the problem? What is the ideal customer profile? I think that's so often missed things in the journey of an entrepreneur. Even when you scale up, right, you tend to miss those things. Even when you shift from a single player to team and then to enterprise, I think. So really great having you, Akshay. And thank you once more to doing for Friday evening. We won't take much of your time now. Probably we'll get back to the larger session or a longer session on a few of the other frameworks that you have learned in your journey as an entrepreneur and now at Notion. So thank you very much, Akshay.
Thanks for having me.